I'm so excited to tell you about Inclusive Neuroverse, a clothing line started by an amazing 7-year-old boy who has autism and ADHD. Their mission? To promote autism acceptance through unique designs overflowing with love. Each piece celebrates neurodiversity and spreads awareness in style. Join the movement today and show your support for understanding and inclusivity. Visit inclusiveneuroverse.com now and make sure you use code QUIETConnection, all one word, all uppercase, at checkout for a 15% discount. Welcome to Quiet Connection, a podcast dedicated to ending the stigma around postpartum mental health. I'm Chelsea. This week, Nicola, founder of Life Now Coaching, shares her journey to becoming a mother and the physical and mental challenges she faced. Nicola had a difficult labor and experienced trauma to her bladder and pelvic floor, which had a significant impact on her daily life, confidence, and mental health. Nicola uses her experience to empower women to prioritize their health and live fulfilling lives. Let's hear Nicola's story. Hello! Today I'm here with Nicola. Nicola, how are you?
I'm really well, thanks, Chelsea.
Thank you. We have another guest from across the pond, which I'm very excited about. I'm so excited that we're reaching moms and birthing people all over the world. So it's good afternoon to you. It's early morning for me still, but I'm going to do my best to be perky and peppy.
Well, you seem to be, so you're doing a very good job.
That's good, because I'm working on just electrolyte water. So, here we go. Nicola, I would love it if you could sort of introduce yourself and also let my listeners know who you were before becoming a parent.
Oh, that's a lovely question. Yeah, so I'm Nicola Farndell. I'm the founder of Life Now Coaching. I live in the UK, as you can hear from the accent. And I set my business up 3 years ago to unwrap what healthy living really means, because I want women to understand why your health is so important. For me, health is at the core of everything when it comes to living a happy life, and certainly as a mother and a parent. Just think it's so important that we strip back how we live our life and what our habits are to really help our kids to understand the importance of taking care of yourself, but also to know what brings happiness, because we're in this fast-paced, very materialistic, digital-led world. And I think, we're seeing lots of health problems, from obesity to type 2 diabetes to ADHD and other neurodivergencies. And our kids are vulnerable. They need us as their mothers to help guide them. And so I really believe if we as women can improve how we take care of ourselves and really reframe what health is about, then we're going to shift that with our kids. And I do that because of my health story, which we're going to dive into today, because a big part of my backstory is linked to my journey to pregnancy and then having my daughter. I have a 16-year-old daughter who yesterday just picked up her exam results in the UK, because they leave school at 16 here. So she's she's off college. Here is different to your college. We have college until 18 and then university. So yeah, I've been a mum for 16 years. And before that, I wouldn't really put a label on who I was, because I've always struggled with my identity and self-worth. And that's been a big part of the journey I've been on. And over the past few years, the self-growth and evolution journey, I guess, into really stepping into the woman that I am and all that I am as that woman, including being a mother. So I think before I had my daughter, Lois, I was just a person trying to exist. If I'm really honest, I've really struggled since I was 19 years old with anxiety and panic disorder. And a lot of my life was spent in survival mode. And so, yeah, I just struggled to get by, trying to live a life that I thought would bring happiness. And a lot of that was not bringing happiness, because I was being very hard on myself and very unaccepting of who I was.
Yeah. I think that's a common thread for a lot of us. especially pre-kids. Kids will really throw a wrench in your whole self-discovery thing and take you down a path you may not have anticipated. So talk to me a little bit about that. Where your journey to becoming a mother, was that something that you had always envisioned for yourself, or just take me through that process?
I think I had always expected to have children. I wouldn't say I was someone who really looked forward to it, as in, dreamt about this day when I'd have kids and have a family, like many women do. It's a desire that they have often from being quite young. I knew it would be part of my future, but because of the anxiety and panic that I struggled with, I was very, very nervous about getting pregnant. And, I wasn't with somebody when I was particularly young. I wasn't in serious relationships where that was on the cards initially, but it was still a worry. And so it just wasn't something that I guess was at the forefront of my plan. And then when I was in a serious relationship and it became apparent we wanted to have this future together and build a family with children, it was really daunting for me because I worried whether I'd, to use like quite an awful term, but this is the sort of language I use, whether I would freak out being pregnant, because a lot of my anxiety was linked to health. I had this fear of dying, and I just really worried about not being able to cope being pregnant. I did a bit of counselling and some work to help me before I decided to go ahead and try to get pregnant because of those worries that I had. So yeah, it was in the plan, or on the life dream at some stage, but it wasn't that I was really, really, looking forward to the point when that happened. But then when I did decide to get pregnant, I found that actually very empowering, that I think I'd made that decision and knew this is right. It's now, the time to try to make this happen. And I fell pregnant within a few months of trying. And sadly, I lost that first pregnancy at just over 11 weeks. Something didn't feel quite right from the beginning. And I don't honestly know whether it was a gut feeling or whether it was that I was just anxious about having fallen pregnant. And I do now, because of what I know and understand and doing my work, believe that whole mind-body connection piece had something to do with losing that pregnancy. I had a very difficult miscarriage. It was quite traumatic. I was admitted to hospital. I had a blood transfusion. They told me to wait 6 months. And honestly, I was distraught. I couldn't bear the thought of waiting 6 months to become pregnant or try to get pregnant again. So, I waited a few months. I had some complications after the miscarriage. So I had to have some things checked. And then when they have kind of given the green light, there was nothing wrong, I thought, okay, I'm just going to fast track this trying and start again after I think about 4 months. And I did fall pregnant, I think a couple of months after that, and had a full-term pregnancy and then my daughter. So yeah, it was an intentional choice to have a baby at that point in my life. I was 32 or 31 when I'd fallen pregnant. So I felt like it was quite a good stage of my life to have a baby. And yeah, it was the pregnancy itself was very different to what I expected. I did really love that feeling of that power that it gave you as a woman to be creating this other human inside of you and growing this human. And that was, I think, one of the first times since I'd been 19 and started to experience anxiety and panic that I felt I was in my own body. I really felt in control, and I had every typical pregnancy symptom. I had the book. I can't remember what the book's called. It's quite a famous, very chunky, thick book,
what
about the whole
to expect when
yeah, that one.
Yeah.
And I would keep that by the bed, and literally it was like, the bleeding gums, yes, the vivid dreams, yes, the pain. I had the whole hand wrist thing really early on, I think between maybe about 9 to 12 weeks, where I could barely lift anything up. It was like I'd suddenly got rheumatoid arthritis in both hands, or the leg cramps, everything came as textbook. And yeah, I did really enjoy being pregnant. in lots of ways, I found it hard further into the pregnancy. I had some back and hip problems, a lot of pelvis pain, which limited a lot the last few weeks. But overall, I just thought it was the most incredible experience to feel the baby moving and know, that you were nurturing this baby inside of you.
Yeah, that's I'm sure it came with a lot of mixed emotions too after experiencing your loss and then to get pregnant. So you talked about like struggling with anxiety and stuff prior to that. Was there any part of you that sort of experienced any sort of anxiety going into this full-term pregnancy, or were you just really living in that power?
No, there was definitely anxiety there. I think once I'd crossed the 12-week threshold, I was much calmer and felt, yeah, this is it. This time, this is going to work. But I did feel more certain about it at the beginning. I had tried to, I guess, coach myself in a way, the way I knew how back then, to not over worry, to not overthink, and to try to appreciate that those thoughts and feelings I had could contribute to the development of a pregnancy when it happened. So yeah, I didn't feel that great rush of power initially, but I did feel more certain and convinced that this is right this time. But during the pregnancy, I did have some moments of anxiety, not over the pregnancy itself. Like I said, that empowerment was really strong, as in, I'm doing this. And the thing that also frightened me was the thought of the labour itself, which I think frightens lots of us, doesn't it? Whether you have anxiety before pregnancy or not. But there was this whole, just mindset of I'm going to do this because I want this and I can do this. But I did have some anxiety, more just related to my own confidence in work situations. That really scared me because I remember vividly being in a meeting room with some other women, people I knew quite well in the workplace, and being in back then it wasn't a video call, it was a teleconference thing, and being asked to speak. And as I'd started to speak, I just had that whole adrenaline rush of nerves, going into the fight or flight state. And my heart was beating so hard and fast, I could barely breathe. And I had to stop speaking, and I used the pregnancy as an excuse for what was going on. And people were quite worried, and afterwards checking if I was okay and so. But I gave myself such a fright because I didn't want anything to happen to the baby. But, that anxiety was still there. I hadn't fixed it or dealt with it really, but the pregnancy had given this positive set of thoughts and feelings to help overcome it as much as I could, but it was still bubbling there underneath. But in terms of the pregnancy, I did feel like really empowered by the whole process of it. Mm-hmm.
So what was, I know you said having some anxiety about labor and whatnot, and we definitely, we have all been there. Did you have any sort of birth plan going into this? Yeah.
Yeah. A big thing for me was staying in control, because what made me nervous was that if I was given an epidural and I was out of control and I became anxious, that I wouldn't be able to manage that anxiety by, potentially moving around, or just moving my body or doing what I felt I needed to suppress the anxiety or, pass through it. So I was really certain that I didn't want an epidural. I really didn't want a C-section. That was something I was very nervous about, both for the thing itself, but also the recovery afterwards. We were actually in the middle of a house renovation and knew I needed to be able to drive after I had the baby. So, there was a bit of added pressure there. But yeah, I just made a very simple plan in terms of, just being in a normal room in the hospital. The UK is quite different to the US. I don't think we're as kind of inclusive even today when it comes to the whole pregnancy, labour, delivery thing. I think it's very transactional and medical approach still. So it was just, I'm going to be in the hospital. I'll have my partner and then my mum there and deliver the baby with as little pain relief. I'll have gas and air and some pain relief, but avoiding an epidural and at all costs avoiding a cesarean. Yeah.
Yeah. I always find it so interesting. This is completely like, it's not off topic, but sidetrack. We don't do the gas and air thing here.
Well, really?
So, yeah. I mean, at least that's not anything that I've heard of. If it happens, I have not heard of it. And I've always been so fascinated about it because I mean, I'm obsessed with British culture anyway. I don't know why, but like I watch Call the Midwife, or I watch like your like A&E shows and things like that, and I'm seeing the moms with the gas and air, and I'm like, what does that actually do?
Well, I'll tell you what it does. It makes you throw up. Like, so.
Oh no!
Oh, it was awful. And in fact, that is like, so that birth plan was completely irrelevant, really.
Yeah,
and
that was going to be my next question.
It was not right for me, I think. And yeah, it's not explained to you. I don't know if it's any better today. Obviously, my daughter's 16, but when I was going through this process with the midwives and so on, like I say, it was just all very kind of medical. And it's, well, you start at the lower level with gas and air if you want any pain relief, and then it's the next stage, and then it's this stage, and then it's an epidural, and that was it. And so it didn't feel like there was much to actually incorporate into a plan, like there wasn't much choice. But I went over my due date and had a sweep to check what was going on and to rupture those membranes. And the midwife did that in my home. And at that point, I think I was 8 or 9 days overdue. And she said, "Oh, have you had any back pain or anything, apart from not the back pain I was in, but any other pain?" No, and I didn't have any Braxton Hicks contractions that I'm aware of at all. And she said, "Oh, you're about 3 centimetres dilated already, so the baby's definitely going to come probably sometime, today or overnight, but you will be in labour at some time in the next 12 hours. So within a few hours of that, the contractions did start quite intensely. And so I knew I was already dilating and would be quite far into that journey. So after an hour or two, we went to hospital and said, "Yep, I'll have the gas and air." Now, I'm someone that growing up never, even today actually, never gets sickness bugs. I've never been a sickly person. But I had one intake of that gas and air, and then that was it. I was just vomiting into one of those cardboard balls. And it's the most weird thing in that it gives you this kind of almost giddy, like a bit like laughing gas, like it's a little bit, oh, I'm woozy, I'm lightheaded, I guess maybe if you use recreational drugs, that very first, I would liken it maybe, because I don't, but to a glass of wine, and you just get that nice, after a couple of sips, like, oh, but it's a bit more intense, but that kind of feeling. But then there was just this sick feeling, but you need it because, well, if you don't have it, then you've got no choice, have you? But because it's there, and I'd started it, every time a contraction was coming, I'd feel gas and air, but then it was sick, and your mouth goes really, really dry from it. I realised as I used it more, it just didn't feel good. It's got this, I want to say, like dirty feeling to it. There's just something not nice. Lots of women love it, but for me, wanting to stay only using gas and air just wasn't the right choice, because I actually didn't like it. But because I'd made that plan and that was what was on there, I kind of went with it probably for too long into the labour.
So how, it feels like such a ridiculous question, but like, how did you progress from there? You're in active labor and you're just vomiting, and I'm so sorry.
And it was literally, I know this is disgusting, but it was just water. I took a big iced bottle of water, prepped it, in the freezer for ready to take into the hospital. So I was drinking this water, and I remember my mum said, "You need to stop drinking that water, Nicola." And I said, "But I've got to, because I'm so dry, like unbelievably dry." So it was just bringing that water back up after every inhale of the gas and air after the contraction had finished. So I remember being getting moved from the admissions area into the delivery room, and I would say it was probably maybe 3 or 4 hours, and I think I was still maybe about 5-6 centimetres dilated. And the midwife checking and saying, "I know you didn't want anything else, but do you think maybe you need this next stage of pain relief, which I can't remember what it was now, but I remember having this clarity of thought and thinking, hang on, you don't get any medal here for being a hero and not taking drugs and pain relief. Let's have the pain relief. So I was like, yeah, let's have the pain relief. And that was the next mistake, because that was just awful. I did feel like I was really then drugged up, and that wasn't what I wanted. As I said, I wanted to feel in control, and I really just didn't like the way it made me feel. And honestly, the pain wasn't any easier to manage. I had a really difficult labour, and it did progress because I dilated up to 9 centimetres. My waters hadn't broken. I was stuck at 9 centimetres for quite a few hours. This was like way into the early hours of the next morning, and I was just exhausted from lack of sleep. And, you know, they made a decision. They talked about cesarean, but because I really didn't want the cesarean, they said, okay, what we're going to have to do is give you an epidural, and we're going to have to give you something else to try and intensify the contractions and the labour to get you to 10 centimetres to deliver the baby, because we don't obviously want the baby to be in distress. And so, you know, I had to accept that I needed to have the epidural. So I was given an epidural, and up until that point, I'd been managing to move around a bit. I'd put on quite a bit of weight when I was pregnant, and I had the back pain, so it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't the most like some women are just, they're able to stand, they can bend, they're like, I'm going to deliver this on all fours. No, that wasn't me.
No, that wasn't me either.
Yeah, move around and bounce on the ball a little bit and try and, you know, feel like, yeah, this is okay. So I had the epidural, and then of course was bedridden, but I could still feel the contractions. And after, I think it was at least another couple of hours later, they'd kept checking on me. They had something attached to the baby's heartbeat to monitor that, and said, you know, you're at 10, we can try and get you to push. In fact, actually at that point, they realised that the baby was back to front. So she was the wrong way around. So she was head down, but she wasn't facing the right way. Yep. So they said, you know, you're not going to get this baby out on your own. You're going to have to deliver in theatre, and we're going to start with forceps, but then we might have to give you a C-section. And so as they were preparing all of the paperwork and to take me down, I said, so what do I have next then to manage the delivery? And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, surely you're going to give me something. And they said, you've had the epidural however long ago. And I said, but I can feel every contraction. And the midwife who had been sitting with me in the room said, she's right. She said she keeps falling asleep, but every time I see on the monitor the contractions coming, she's screaming in pain and writhing, you know, so she can feel it. So then I ended up with a full spinal block and couldn't feel anything from, you know, shoulders down. And that I gave birth at 6:30 in the morning, and that didn't wear off until quite late in the afternoon. So the plan was just like out of the window.
Totally out the window.
Yeah, and I ended up, you know, I avoided the cesarean, but unfortunately I had a Kaelin's delivery. I don't know if you call it that in the US, but where it wasn't just forceps to pull the baby out, they used the forceps to turn the baby the right way around, and then she slipped back. And so they said, this is the last time we're going to try again to turn, and if she doesn't, we are going to give you a C-section, because we just can't get the baby out the way that she is. Or we didn't know it was a girl at that point. And, you know, they were telling me to push, to bear down, and I just couldn't feel a thing. And I just, that's one thing, because I've only got one child, that I'm quite saddened about, that I didn't get to experience that feeling, that sensation of needing, you know, when women say, oh, I was ready to push. I never experienced that even before the epidural, when they had been trying to get me to push. And so, you know, I just had to grit and try to do what I thought was pushing to help them get this baby out. And, you know, she did come out on the next turn. But then I was left with quite a lot of trauma to my bladder and pelvic floor, which have changed my life and health down there forever, really. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You had mentioned that there was definitely a physical impact. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, about the aftermath of that birth?
Yeah, because I think it's really important to share, Chelsea, because I know you probably touched on this in other conversations, or maybe in slightly different ways with other guests. But nobody had ever explained to me and to all of the other new mums that I got to know after I had my daughter that the after bit could be so difficult. It was just this painted picture of you have your baby and you come home and it's lovely and you feed your baby yourself and you just fall in love with this baby, and then everyone's coming to visit and it's wonderful and you're glowing and you take them for walks in the pram and, you know, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Nobody said that you were going to bleed for 6 to 8 weeks, that you could have something like this happen from a vaginal birth. I knew that a cesarean took recovery, but not the intensity of what happened to me. And, I came home from hospital and felt very battered and bruised and traumatised. And within a couple of days of being at home, I knew there was going to be some fluid leakage and things, but then realised basically at any point where I was opening my legs, I was weeing, I was having urine come out, leaking. And it wasn't that I had an urge to pass water, but it was just happening. And so, obviously it was put down to, you've just delivered, you've got stitches, it was quite traumatic, it's going to take, a few weeks. Okay, that's fine. But then this went on beyond those few weeks and it got quite difficult. And that mental health piece as well as the physical health was just so difficult, because I did want to enjoy being a new mother and having my baby, and I wanted to go out for walks and I wanted to carry her about and I wanted to see people and enjoy, but all of this other stuff started kicking in of, that you're just incontinent and it's not nice and there's a smell and it's, restricting where you can go and what you want to do. So, they told me I had to wait until 6 months post-delivery to do anything at all, which was a long time. And then at that point it was, okay, let's refer you to a consultant, let's run some tests, and then let's start you on a physiotherapy, regime, which all of that probably went on for the first 2 years of being a new mother, going to the hospital, having my daughter there in a pushchair at 1 while I'm behind the curtain, having, different physio and doing it at home. And it was just such an awful thing. And I'd gone back to work after a year of maternity leave, and I had to wear pads for any kind of exercise, light exercise. I had to wear pads if I was going somewhere and didn't know there would be a toilet close by. Even just walking upstairs, I could start to leak. It wasn't, the star jumps, the running, that it was just anything. It really opening my legs. And I just felt really, it just affected my confidence. I felt not clean, and it did impact, my sexual desire and sex life and so on. It just was hard. And I gave up after 2 years. I just said, I can't keep doing this. This has been since she was born. I need a break. I need to just try to, live a normal life and mentally try to manage this, which I did for a couple of years, because what they'd offered was an operation, which they said, if you do have this operation, you really should have it after you've had all of the children you want to have. And I wasn't sure if I wanted any more at that point. So I did end up having the operation after about 5 years, of having my daughter, because I was still, heavily incontinent. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I cannot imagine, like you were saying, like the impact that it has on your physical health is one thing, but the impact that it makes on your mental health, 5 years. You're not only going through the hormonal shifts and changes of becoming a parent and just having birthed a human, 5 years of struggling with this physical health issue. Yeah. And you said it really took a toll on your confidence. How did that sort of impact your view of yourself as a mother?
It was really tough, because I knew people who had an easy pregnancy, an easy fast delivery, literally, like my sister-in-law was one of them. She gave birth to 2 girls and came home, and the next day you'd just think she hadn't even had a baby. It was just fine. And there was me. And so there was a lot of that kind of self-critic talk about, well, why was this you? And because of the anxiety struggles I had and it being linked to health and so on, it was like, well, it's you, it's your body, you know, you are broken and you've naturally then had this thing happen to you and you aren't good enough. So, you know, it really did affect me in lots of ways and at work, especially because that year when I was on maternity leave, my anxiety was great. You know, I really loved being a mother. It was the happiest I'd been since being a kid, really. I just loved the freedom of being with her. There were times that I found it difficult, of course, but I was a much better person. And when I went back to work, that just all became overwhelming. I was really embarrassed about how frequently I needed to go to the toilet. I was embarrassed if, you know, we had a communal changing room at work. We had a gym in the workplace because I worked for Nike, so we had a gym, you know,
nice.
Having to always go to the toilet to remove the pad before then getting changed, but then put the pad back on before the class started or the workout. And then, you know, and it was just all of this noise all of the time about it. And I did feel disappointed because I felt like I hadn't been able to have her and then just go with whatever happened, you know, and feel it that I had this stuff going on and then I had to go for so many appointments and it was there, it was a part of our life. So I think there was lots of different ways it affected me. And one of the things I did want to share, because I'm sure lots of women will resonate with this, is that stigma attached to incontinence and, you know, even if it's not full incontinence, still, you know, the leakage.
Yeah.
It even today, and funny enough, I was actually chatting to someone who's a pelvic floor specialist yesterday about this. We are so embarrassed to even talk to other women about it. I didn't share this with anyone because I was so embarrassed. And it was only, it was a long time actually after I'd had the operation when I didn't tell people at work and certain people would comment saying, oh, God, I keep leaking when I do those star jumps, or, you know, younger than me. And I'd say to them, you need to look into this. You know, you're only in your 30s or even younger. And then I'd share a little bit and just say, look, I had lots of problems. I've actually had an operation. But women don't know about it. Like we're only taught to do Kegels like when we're pregnant. And I mean, really, who does them daily as often as you should when you're pregnant? And we now know like Kegels don't work for everything we need for our pelvic floor afterwards. Like we're obviously, you know, thrust into caring for this newborn infant, and so doing your pelvic floor exercises are way down the list and so on. But we're just not taught not just about the risk of incontinence, but also what our pelvic floor does in our whole body. You know, men as well. Like, it's important for all of us. And I just think there's this stigma attached to it, which doesn't need to be there, because this thing is really important to long-term health, especially when we age.
It's actually, I'm not sure what it's like over in the UK, but there is becoming a little bit more awareness about pelvic floor care and maintenance, especially, or maybe I would say maybe even exclusively post-birth here in the US. So, and that's only been within the last like 10 years. And I can say that confidently because when I had my first in 2015, I never even pelvic floor physical therapy. Like, what is that? Like, what do you even what is my pelvic floor? What are you talking about? And then when I had my second in 2022, it was almost immediate. I was seeing a chiropractor and she was like, so I'd love to start working on your pelvic floor. And I'm like, okay. Like,
no, we do not have anything. Your healthcare system's obviously very different because it's private.
Very different.
You pay for your care. That does not exist in the UK at all. There's no post-birth support at all, unless, like, say, you've been referred because there's something wrong. But then you could be waiting a year, 2 years on an NHS waiting list to see someone as well. So, you know, that's brilliant. And I've certainly heard a few really good guests on podcasts over the last couple of years. In fact, there was one on Mel Robbins' podcast just in the past couple of weeks. Yep. She's a US specialist for pelvic floor and OBGYN. And she talks about it so amazingly in not just the sense of someone having a baby and afterwards, but just generally about pelvic floor. But Yeah, definitely in the UK, it's an old woman's problem, and that's why it's an embarrassing thing to discuss. It's what old women do when they can't hold their bladder anymore.
Yeah,
and so it's crazy. Mm-hmm.
It's something that we should be thinking about when, like you said, it's something we should be thinking about in our 20s and 30s, and like and I will say, just to clarify, like, this does not come from, like, I sought out a chiropractor. I had already been seeing a chiropractor for different reasons, and the chiropractor asked me, would you like me to do some pelvic floor work after? And I was like, yes. So it's definitely not something that's like coming with the package.
Yeah, it's not. Everyone gets it.
And another big difference, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong completely, but most birthing people in the US are only seen once after they give birth, and it's usually 6 to 8 weeks after they have the baby, and then you're on your merry way. So we're not really getting a lot of aftercare. I've heard from a couple of guests in the UK that at least you have access to a midwife after birth. Yeah.
I think it's still the same now. You used to have a daily visit to your home from the midwife every day for, I think, 7 days it used to be. And I think there's something like that, but I don't think it's every day now. But yeah, she would pick up if there is anything with you as well as with the baby. But we are, like you've just said, I think it's a 6-week check maybe with the GP, but it's much more around your mental health. It's like for postnatal depression or postpartum depression, it's checking those kind of things as opposed to the physical things, which I would say is just such a big miss. It's because
we are interconnected.
Exactly. So very much. And lots of women may not have the incontinence at that point, but also it's the your abdominal muscles, and them coming back together properly. And I think from memory, the GP just does a very basic on-hand touch with them to check to make sure they are, coming back the way that they should together. But lots of women find their leakage problems come a little bit later as well. So, you signed off and that's it. You think, well, I'm fine. But then maybe months or, further down the line. And for lots of women who haven't had problems right after having children, they do experience it as they approach menopause. Now we know that can be even early 40s, mid 40s in perimenopause. They start at them because all of those tissues are changing with the reduction in estrogen and so on. And if they're already weak because of 1 or 2 plus, pregnancies and then vaginal deliveries, then it's often why a lot of women in midlife now are starting to have problems with their pelvic floor. And so we know, it's not an old lady problem. This is a problem mainly in females, but males do get pelvic floor challenges as well. But like you said, in our 20s really is, I think this is a whole other conversation track thing. But, like as kids at school, what you taught about puberty is for girls about periods, and that's kind of it, and that a boy has sperm and how you make a baby. But it stops there. There's no whole hormonal life cycle explanation, but also no just women's health, as in what happens, checking your breasts, checking things down there are all right. What your pelvic floor is like, I think it should all be taught young, so it becomes just a natural part of life, and you grow up being strong, so that you're not waiting for the problem to fix it. And that's very much my ethos. What I do with perimenopause and menopause, I don't wait for the flames to put the fire out. We've got to get that way, I think, with lots, because there's so much changes physically when we have a pregnancy as well. It's not just pelvic floor, that's a big part. But, lots of people have ongoing back problems, problems even with your rib cage. I had a rib that didn't move properly whilst I was pregnant, which had to be resolved as well. So there's so many things that can happen because it's a big deal. Creating a baby, a lot happens in your body, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree 100%. I've chatted about this a few times on the podcast now, just about how we're not preparing our youth for not only childbearing, because not everyone's gonna go down that path, but like the changes that your body goes through as you age don't end in puberty.
Yeah.
And it's not just like, well, you're going to get your period and have a good life.
That's it, yeah. Crack on.
Yeah. Like there are so many things about our bodies that are changing and evolving. And giving us that knowledge when we're younger, number one, prepares us. Number two, destigmatizes the whole conversation so that you're not at work being like, I can't tell anybody about this, about what's going on. It gives us power over our bodies and our health. Because not with knowledge comes power. So yes, I agree 100% that we need to be doing better in our health classes. But you're right, that is another podcast. I could go down a whole rabbit hole with that. Navigating back to you and your story, did you have any sort of a support system while you were going through this? Like this was a lengthy period of time and so much stacked against you during this transition. Did you have a support system sort of helping, like take care of you, take care of baby?
Really.
No.
And that was really hard.
Yeah.
My mum had some health problems, which all kind of came from, she had quite a serious brain aneurysm in her early 50s. And by the time I got pregnant, it was only maybe 6 or so years later, but she'd started to have some quite significant mental health shifts. And up to that point, she'd always been very mobile, very hands-on, very much that typical mother of just, doing everything for the kids and the house and so on. And I just expected her to be there at every stage of the point when I did have a baby. And it wasn't like that. I'd moved a bit further away from where my parents lived and friends lived. And I was actually really isolated. And in those, well, especially the first week or two when you have a newborn, I think any help you can get, whether it's someone dropping off some prepared meals or offering to help with washing, I just didn't have anything. And we were renovating the house and it was really, really difficult. I didn't have any support, and I'm going to come back to this, on the problems I had, physically with the incontinence as well. It felt quite a lonely, difficult thing to go through. And like I say, I had all of this shame and stigma. I had my partner, baby's father, but he wasn't the most supportive and just kind of, he got it, and he would give, a shoulder to lean on or cry on sort of thing. But he wasn't really, just think like self-aware of what something like that could cause and what it felt like, because he'd never had any health problems. He was quite a bit older than me as well. And so, although I had a partner and I could talk and share, I'd still felt like I was in it myself, and even down to, well, what do I do next for this? That it was just me. And that was hard. And I did have a point quite a few weeks after having the baby where I had a bit of a breakdown. I think I'd just gone on this adrenaline and, I'd say, trying to renovate the house and everything with the new baby, that I just hit a point where I thought, well, I wasn't thinking, because I just didn't feel like I was actually, in my body. I didn't have postnatal depression, but I did have a quite a dip that, it's, fortunately I was able to pick myself up from.
And that's totally, I want to sort of pause a little bit, and like when you say like, well, I didn't have postnatal depression, I think so many new moms feel like they have to justify their feelings. And just because you don't have you don't have to have a diagnosis, you don't have to have a perinatal mental health diagnosis to feel really low, or to have a moment where it all sort of sneaks up on you. And that's 100% valid. Like it's valid to be like, I can't handle this. You know what I mean? Or like this is too much. So just acknowledging, like, you were facing a lot. And those low points are going to happen. And it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It just means I say this all the time now, but like, it feels hard because it is hard. So what was sort of the turning point for you? Like, so I know you mentioned it was really 5 years before you got the surgery that you needed and whatnot. But what was the turning point for you when you were like, I can't, I can't do it like this anymore. I can't continue on like this anymore.
I think it was just having managed it for so many years that I just thought, I'm still a young woman. I decided I was very unlikely to have another pregnancy or child, and just thought, I have to do something about this because it was really affecting, like say, my mental health and everything that goes with that, my self-worth. They were already, always difficult because of just where I was at and the anxiety and so on. But yeah, I just thought I have to do something because I can't live, at this point, how old, was mid-30s. I can't live possibly another 40 years, which, thinking, well, when you get older, it's going to get worse anyway. So it was just thinking, actually, I've had enough of trying to fix it and giving it that break. I mean, one of the things I had to do as well was wear this TENS machine, and I had to tell everyone at work it was for a bad back, and, it's trying to reprogram the bladder message to the brain. And so I tried so many different avenues, which I think were all worthwhile trying. But it was like, no, I'm done with that. It's got to be fixed because I just felt dirty a lot of the time. I just felt like, I was wearing these pads that just wasn't nice to have outside of your body, absorbing it. So, yeah, and I was lucky enough that through the job I had, I did have private healthcare, which made it easier, because on the NHS here, it had been quite a process from that 6 months post-pregnancy to actually go, no, this is still an issue. Now I need help, to then get seen, to then have tests. And so I remember, I think it was about the October time, making this decision that I was going to pursue, seeing if I could have surgery. And went to the NHS and they said, okay, it's going to be quite a long wait. So then I said, okay, let's see if I can do this privately through my healthcare. And then I had the operation at the beginning of February, so only a few months later. And I didn't get an appointment to go and see someone on the NHS until a year after I'd gone on that wait list. So by that point, I'd already had the surgery like eight months. So that would have been the start, to then wait to get booked in for tests, which could have been months. And so I think that's probably puts a lot of women off as well, because there's no clear path of, well, you see this person and then you'll get tests. It's like, well, and again, a whole other thing, but the NHS has certainly shifted. I mean, we've got a brilliant healthcare system compared to many countries, but post-COVID, it isn't what it used to be.
Yeah.
And, there's just not that clear direction of, okay, when you have this problem as a woman with continence and pelvic floor, you're going to get seen by this person and then we'll do tests. So it's a bit of the unknown, and like, oh, I don't know if I can wait that long. I might as well just get on with it how it is. So, it was just that point of, right, now I have to do something and try and make this a shift. And I can honestly say it was life-changing, that surgery. I mean, so that particular surgery is now banned in the UK, the vaginal tape using the mesh. I think it is in the US. I'm not 100%.
I had never heard of it. Yeah,
there's sadly lots of women have been very impacted physically by the mesh moving or being in the wrong position and given a lot of pain problems and even paralysis and so on. Now I know they can use the mesh, or they can use part of your own, I don't know if it's skin or something, from your own body to create this. It's basically a hammock to lift up your urethra. But yeah, I mean, for me, as much as what I know, there were a lot of cons to that surgery. It has been life-changing, but my concern is that I think I'm 11, 12 years maybe coming up to having had it, and its lifespan is really 5 to 10 years, possibly at the very most, in a small percentage of people, 15 years. And I could not bear to go back to where I was. And that's something, as I was just having a conversation with someone yesterday about this, about how I can start. Because I was then never told when I had the operation that I should also do, rehabilitation, strengthening work for future. health
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
prevention of incontinence. It was just where you've had the operation, that's it. And that wasn't plain sailing either. It was very, very painful for a long time. But it was life-changing in terms of just zero, like, I can, apart from now I've got a bad back and a bad knee, but I can jump, I can run, and I do not leak one little bit. I can sneeze, I can cough, laugh, and so many women, that's just life day in, day out.
Yeah.
So I know there are other alternatives now to help with that issue that are not that same kind of surgery. There are some alternative medical interventions, but there are also lots of new ways that are not just doing your Kegel pelvic floor exercises, but other types of exercises, including the right type of breathing and so on. So there's a lot more available now. But again, I'm a health coach and I don't know all about this. I know it exists, but I don't know it. So the normal woman on the street, she doesn't know this, as we said, yeah.
Right. And also, there is this stereotype of like any person who's had a baby, like anytime you laugh you pee, or anytime you jump you pee, or anytime. So like there's varying degrees of this as well. But it's the same thing with perinatal mental health disorders. We have to think about our language. It's not normal. It's common. It's common. But it's not normal. And we don't need to just accept like, oh yeah, well, I pee every time I sneeze now. But there are things that you can do. So taking us sort of, now your daughter's 16, you said, taking us sort of doing a big jump ahead, how did all of this impact what you're doing now?
Everything that I experienced, like what I've talked about here, that was related to having been pregnant and giving birth. I had a lot of mental health and other physical health challenges. I never spoke, as I say, openly about the incontinence problems, and I was diagnosed with an overactive bladder, which there's nothing I can do about that. That I still have that. But I hid that for all of those years. And I'd also hidden my mental health struggles very shamefully because I was embarrassed. I thought, I was this kind of freak, that there was something abnormal with me and so on. And it was through that whole journey of having that operation, but then years later, changing also my approach to what I ate and how I exercised, feeling some benefit from that. But 3.5 years ago, I was made redundant. I'd been at Nike for 20 years. It was the pandemic. I'd lost my mum, sadly. Before the pandemic, she was only 68. And it was all just like, oh my God, your health is so important. And I knew through the work I did at Nike, the power of moving your body. I'd done a lot of work on girls and women and how they were being impacted by girls dropping out of sport at quite a young age at school and, the risks to our health as women. So I had that knowledge from there, but then I had my lived experience of my own health journey, but then having seen what my mum went through. And sadly, what happened to her was very much lifestyle related and could have been avoided if she was educated on, okay, actually, if I make this choice, then that's going to help. And then that choice would help even more. And then I'm going to feel better. And then that will become easier. And so I just had this huge passion about helping other women to appreciate their health, because it is everything. And I know, even if I didn't have those pre-existing mental health struggles, what I experienced having, like I said, been through an incredible experience of having a pregnancy and then having a baby and loving being a mother, that changed me so much, and I had, like I say, all that narrative running around, that criticism, because I felt a bit like I'd failed as a woman and as a mother and so on. And none of us should feel that. We've got to understand, as you said, our bodies change constantly. Like anyone born female is going to go through that hormonal season or seasons of life.
Yeah.
And we are different to anyone who's born male. And I know there are people who identify as non-genders or different genders and so on. So I'm always careful about the language. But, if we're talking about kind of in this sense, we are very different as women, and we don't get taught that, and we need to know that. But we also need to know it from that lens of we deserve to think and know, well, not think, we deserve to know we're worthy and that we're valuable and we get this one life. And I spent so many years not believing I had any value and thinking I was flawed because I didn't look a certain way, that my size wasn't a certain size, all of that crap that many, many, many women have that they then just think is the thing they've got to fix. Whereas there is so much more that is much more important when it comes to being healthy, strong, fulfilled, confident, happy women. And so, everything was just so like interlinked throughout my journey and what I'd learned as, a daughter to my mother and seeing her health deteriorate, and then practically in the corporate work I did as well.
Yeah. So it was really a culmination of your life experience, and it was just like, this makes sense. I need to take what I have learned and experienced and share it with other women. And that's amazing. And I'm thankful that you're doing that, because we really do need to empower, like you said, women or people who are born female, or I like to call us sometimes, not everybody loves this term, but I say, like, if you own a uterus, like, you really need to learn about what that means and how it's going to impact your health. And I'm learning that for sure right now. But I'm thankful for the work that you do. This feels like a nice, like, full circle moment. I always wait until I'm close to the end of a session to figure out what I'm going to ask. And as my, like, wrap up question, and I think I know what I'm going to ask you. Given everything that you've gone through, given all of the different sort of titles you've held and shifts that you've gone through, if you had to pick one message or one sort of just one thing that you want my listeners to take away from your story, what would you hope that to be?
That's such a powerful question. And that actually is a question that is why I do what I do. Like, we have to know the value of our health. So that's it, understand the value of our health to make sure that you get in control of your health so that you can live a long, strong and happy life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that has been, that message was clearly conveyed through your whole story. So I'm so glad that you're doing the work that you're doing. And I think a lot of us come into what we're meant to do through going through trials that we may not necessarily wish on anyone else. But doing the work to empower others is beautiful. So thank you for doing that. Nicola, where can my listeners find you if they want to learn more about the work that you're doing?
Yeah, come and check me out on Instagram as lifenow_coaching, because I'm all about living life now. We don't get a second go at it. So it's embracing life now. And I have my podcast, which is Women's Health Unwrapped as well. So maybe, check that out and see if there's anything that can inspire you to take better care of yourself.
Absolutely. And the link to your podcast will be in the show notes, so listeners check that out. And I want to thank you so much for chatting with me, for being flexible through all of my life challenges and scheduling and rescheduling. Thank you for sharing your story and helping to end the cycle of shame.
Honestly, I've really enjoyed this because it's a different conversation in many ways to ones I often have on podcasts. And I've really enjoyed reminiscing about my pregnancy and birth journey as well. And because it is such a part of who you are as well. I thought you were going to ask at the end to give a label to, like, how I would describe myself now.
Do that. I would love that.
I was going to, I would have said, like, well, I'm a woman. Because I really, really like that now, where I didn't think about that in the past. But having having just relived this, it's brought me a little bit of like, oh yeah, you did that, like that's part of you. Because it's easy to forget, isn't it? You get caught up in the parenting itself. So yeah, I appreciate the conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
I'm so glad. Thank you, Nicola, for highlighting a side of postpartum that is not often considered. The mental and physical aftermath and how they are so intertwined. I definitely encourage my listeners to check out Nicola's podcast, Women's Health Unwrapped, and visit her website to learn more about how she's using her experiences to empower women to take control of their health. You can keep up with us on Quiet Connection by following us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads at Quiet Connection Podcast. You can help our community grow by leaving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and consider sharing our episodes on social media. To share your personal journey, you can contact us through our website at quietconnectionpodcast.com or by email at quietconnectionppmh@gmail.com. Join us next time when another story is told and you realize you are not alone. I see you.